Okay, we're
It's
good.
working. Cool. Hello, everybody. It's good to be here. I'm Jessica Maitri, and this is Denise Jensen.
Hello.
Yeah, and we decided we really wanted to do a topic that has been kind of on both of our hearts and minds recently, and wanted to share our story and how it relates to what is happening right now in our collective, in our world. And really, our intention is that we hope that it invites more introspection for anybody that this resonates with. Um, any other intentions you can think of, Denise? We're kind of just playing off each other today.
We are. Yeah, no, I think you've got it right on, Jess. It's really just this, we feel like, we've been through experiences that feel like they are resonating now with others, and we want to be able to share that and kind of give people an opportunity to see how we've navigated some of this in our past and current. So
Yeah, I love that. And you know, as Denise and I were talking, we realize that as she and I talk together, we get more insight, more than we would if we were to just sit in meditation or just go in and try and get answers, which we can, but a lot of our insight has been collaborating with each other and then other people that we resonate with. And so hopefully our interaction or our video today can encourage people to start to speak more and then also share more with each other, and as a way to understand what their truth is. Because I think a lot of people maybe don't even know that right now. They're so confused as to what's real and what's not, that they might not even know what their truth is.
yes, yes, exactly. And moving from this space of life being created for us to co-creating life, right? And I feel like I get to co-create for myself, but also I co-create better when I am in relation to others who are also exercising the same kind of space that I am, as far as how do I be a sovereign being and how do I show up for myself in a way that's different than what I used to. And so.
Mm-hmm. And actually, maybe I'll ask you, Denise, and we can talk about this, but I'd love to explore the meaning of sovereignty, because I know that's a word that's been like kind of used a lot lately. And but a lot of people are like, well, I don't even know what that means. So what does it mean to you? And then I'll speak about what it means to me.
Yes. Oh, I think that's a perfect way to start out. So for me, sovereignty, so I grew up in kind of a space of where others told me how I should act, how I should think, how I should feel, you know, what's right, what's wrong, what my space, my personal bubble should be, all of those kinds of things. Like, so life was handed to me, and it kind of happens for all of us as kids, right? Like, our parents do this whole thing for us because we're learning, right? And going through that learning stage. And so, but I took that to a space of, oh, somebody must tell me everything that goes on in my life. And so I really looked for guidance and direction from other people and never from within. And so for me, sovereignty is, how do I create space? How do I know for myself what is right, what is wrong, what works for me, what doesn't work for me? How do I create safe space? So sovereignty is all about, I'm my own human, I am my own higher self, I am my own connection to source, and and it's my job to discern what that looks like for me. And so that's sovereignty to me. I don't know, how about for you, Jess?
Oh, I love that. I love that you just said it's my job to discern what it is, because before this call, we were talking about how I think as a collective, we're moving into this space of being fully self-responsible, which is what sovereignty means to me, is I no longer can play the victim. I'm not able to blame somebody or something outside of myself for what's happening in my life and how I show up to life. I have to own all of it. And so I think that's hard though. Like, if to say I'm a sovereign being, that's one thing, but that also means I'm fully responsible for what's happening right now.
Yes. And
So,
I think that's like the exciting and the scary thing, right? Because all of a sudden I get to own all of it. So the really horrible stuff that shows up in my life, I get to own and take ownership of. And the really amazing, great stuff, I get to own and take ownership of as well. And it's, this is going to sound like a weird analogy, but it's no longer being a sheep, but it's being the shepherd and leading myself and all of the things that show up around me.
yes.
But that's scary to do sometimes, right? And also it's the most freeing thing that you can do.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And so as a little backstory here, Denise and I connect very well because we have a lot in common. We have a lot of similar background. We both grew up in the LDS church. Both are not, practicing that anymore and don't consider ourselves Mormon anymore. So we can share a little bit about that. And also Denise and I come from the background of social work and understanding that kind of a system. And so there's all these different ways that these external authorities kind of play a role, or that we've experienced playing a role in our life, that we may have at one point been, quote, sheep in, but to understand what that feels like, and then to become, like you said, the shepherd, and then to understand that how we help others the best right now is to not try and save, but to be leading in our sovereignty so that people can follow, but moving out of saving, right?
Exactly. And I think for me, for a long time, what has, like in the work that I have done historically, and it's not really what resonates for me as much anymore, but it's really how in relationships, I show up as, how can I save somebody? How can I rescue them from what they're feeling, what they're experiencing, what doesn't feel good for them? How can I fix that for them? I've always been a really good fixer and saver, and so having to show up differently for myself, because that doesn't resonate as much anymore, and has been a new experience, and has been something that I've really appreciated in Jess, is that she's kind of doing that same transition of how do I do this transition from saving and rescuing to how do I show up in my sovereign space, how do I lead, and how do I do it in a way that feels right and authentic for right now.
Mm-hmm. That's a scary transition, especially on those of us that are really on the front lines of doing a lot of this, quote, healing work as therapists or coaches, or, holding space for pain. We're really being asked to let go of trying to save and heal. We're actually being asked to just be our best self. And it feels isolating. It can feel kind of isolating to be a trailblazer in a way, but that's why we find each other. So we don't feel so alone in it.
It is, isn't it? Oh, but yeah. It does feel good when we finally find each other, and it's like, oh, okay, I don't have to go this alone. There are other people out there who are feeling and doing and experiencing the same things, and there's community in that, and it's so refreshing.
Yeah. I'm wondering if maybe we talked about models of oppression, and one of those stages being pendulation, right? Like, as you come out of any kind of oppressive model, how you can really go to an extreme before finding a balance. Any thoughts on that? Maybe you could start us out with any thoughts on that.
Oh my goodness, this has been my life, right?
Me too.
I think it's interesting to reflect back on life and where I've come from. I grew up in a really strict religious background, right? And it was it felt very oppressive at times. And so I have done this kind of back and forth over my life of, this feels too oppressive, this doesn't fit for me, I don't want to do this anymore. And then I swing to this really, I need freedom, I need to feel all of the feels, I need to do all of the things. So for me, it was coming out of really rigid religious beliefs into, how much can I drink? What other things can I do and try? And what kind, how much sex can I have? Like all of this stuff that didn't fit in the culture that I was raised in, that then I was like, oh, I need to go to this other thing because it feels really free. And then I would get to a place where that didn't resonate as well because it was almost too free, right? And so then I would find something, whether it was a relationship or a job or, you know, some sort of something that would bring me back into this more oppressive state of, so sometimes it's really negative relationships. It's jobs that don't feel right, but give lots of rigidity, right? And lots of, here's the box that you have to check off and that sort of thing. And then that doesn't feel right. And I go back to this other pendulum of, you know, what can I do that feels free and feels, you know, big and grand, and I want to feel expansive and all of those kinds of things. And so it's been kind of this, for me, pendulum of going back and forth between oppression, you know, or more oppressive states to more free states to, I really have gotten to a space now where it's more of how do I be centered, and how do I show up authentically as myself in a way that isn't about duality, isn't about right or wrong, but is about being in this present moment. How does this feel and show up for me? And it's more centering now, right? And so finding space internally to allow that to happen has been really big for me because the swings aren't as intense, right? So, and I feel like we're all experiencing some of that right now. We're all experiencing some level of oppression right now, right?
Yeah.
And for so many of us, you know, how do we have to stay home. Jobs are changing really significantly. And for a lot of people, it feels really oppressive, right? So then what are we going to do after this piece, and how do we show up a little bit differently? And, you know, there's going to be probably for a lot of us this big swing to, I need some sense of freedom and I need some sense of showing up differently. And so, I mean, I think for me, part of my hope out of all of this is that recognition of we can have that in ourselves right now. And it doesn't, and we don't have to do that big swing, you know, like that was just part of my experience, but it doesn't have to be that way for everybody. So how about for you?
I love that. I feel like we just like channel each other. You might as well just put my name on that. Yeah, no, that's so good. That's so good. Yeah, another thing is you were talking that as part of the models of oppression that I've experienced is like for like religion, for example, is when you're the black sheep and you start to be the one that starts questioning and asking the questions no one else is asking and starting to really speak up, what happens is the guilt and the shame and like kind of like the, interestingly enough, the social what do they call it? It's not social distancing, but there's another thing that happens in religion where it's like, say that again.
I said like the social norms.
Yeah, but like it's almost like if you speak up and you don't follow the crowd, then you're kind of shut out socially. You're kind of socially shunned in a way, in their own way. And so it's interesting because Denise and I have both been noticing so many similarities between what's happening in our world right now and what happens when you start to be the black sheep in religion or any other structure. Where you kind of break out of it. So it's, I do think that there's some there's a healthy dynamic that can come with owning our voice, but to the point where it's a healthy way of owning it instead of going completely, like Denise was saying, like swinging completely in a direction that's not balanced. But like it kind of comes back to discernment, is how do we know what's healthy for us and how we can own our truth right now? Yeah, and I think that just comes down to being brave and speaking up, even if people are going to be upset about it right now, potentially.
Exactly. So you talked a little bit, Jess, about discernment, and can you talk a little bit more about what that looks like for you? Because I think for me, I was taught something different than what I what resonates for me now about discernment. So will you kind of talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I agree with you there that discernment is now for me means only what feels good in my body. It doesn't actually, oftentimes it's not even logical. My logical brain doesn't even have anything to do with discernment. At times it does, but most of the time it's how does this feel right now? And there's no third party involved, where before it was like like in the Mormon church, it's like the Holy Ghost or the prophet or somebody, the bishop, right? Or even like, your spouse, if the one that holds the priesthood, like there was always somebody else that held that ultimate authority over what was right for you. And now discernment for me, it's just me. I am a direct source to what is true for me. And I don't need validation from anybody else.
Yes.
So
yeah. Oh, that's so huge too, right? I think for me, the thing that had struck me in what you said is that there was always somebody else, right? That told me what was right and what was good for me. And now it's more of can I get still for just a second? And can I feel what's showing up for me? So I've always been this person who wasn't centered in their body. I didn't really feel my body. In fact, there were times in my life where I could kind of dissociate from what was going on in my body. And so getting really present and clear for me was a learning experience. But now that I see myself as like this sovereign being, right? Connected to source, connected to higher self, who can co-create and do all these things. I open myself up to the idea of what feels right in the moment. And it's more than a feeling, right? It's more of a peace. So this happens when people show up for me. What does the energy feel like in the room? When I get goosebumps and I get excited and I get, warm and tingly, like oftentimes when I'm discerning something that is good for me, it's my whole body warms up, right? And it lights up. I get goosebumps. I get a feeling of kind of calm. But when not good shows up, or when something that isn't for my greater good shows up, I feel cold. I feel shut down. I feel like I am not engaged. I feel drained energetically, tired, those kinds of things. And it took me a long time to recognize that my body was telling me, and that my mind and my whole being was telling me what was right all along and what wasn't right all along. But I didn't know that I had the authority to actually say yes and no to things, right? And that I could have that ability to do that. So now I look for, when I'm saying discerning, I'm like, oh, how does it feel? Well, am I warm? Am I cold? Am I disconnected? Am I engaged? Those are the things that tell me if something's right or wrong, or if it feels right or wrong.
And I think it's important too, if anyone else that's listening is resonating, that we don't need to explain to anybody else why it doesn't feel right or wrong. All we have to do now is start to own it and just say, whatever's happening right now just doesn't feel right to me. And so my answer is no. And that we don't owe any explanation other than it just doesn't feel right. Or this does feel right, and I don't know why, but I'm going to follow it. I'm going to start trusting what feels right without having to explain myself.
Yes. Yes. And that's so big, right? The not having to explain myself. I feel like I've had to justify myself for my entire life. And now all of a sudden I don't have to, there's no justification, there just is. And it can be what it is in this moment, and it doesn't have to be the right thing for the rest of my life or for eternity, right? I was always taught there were eternal consequences to everything that I did. And while there might be some of that, it really is okay for things to be really great and perfect right now, and for me to be able to choose that it doesn't feel right at another time. and so to disconnect from that, it has to be right forever, really allows me to make more intuitive choices for myself.
And that's so important right now because we haven't really touched a whole lot on fear consciousness, but what you just said just reminded me that everything in the media right now is encouraging us to look at a future that isn't even here yet. It's encouraging us to look at the worst case scenario based on, it's funny because even in the numbers, they keep saying, you know, look at Italy or look at how quick it spread in all these other places. And so they're looking to the past. And I understand logically on some level, but there's doesn't seem to be a lot of room for letting things naturally just take one day at a time and show us what the next step is instead of projecting this fear into the future that's not even here yet. I mean, nobody really knows. And that's interesting. Nobody really knows the future. So it's getting out of fear and starting to really trust what's right in this moment and just allowing it to unfold instead of predicting.
Yes, yes. And I feel like we not oftentimes, I think 99% of the population is taught, you know, whatever I do today has future consequences and I need to plan for the future, right? Like adulting is all about how do I be planful and mindful of the future and make sure I'm got enough money to pay my bills and do all of the things and, you know, follow the rules and like all of those constructs that keep us in fear, right? And so part of, I think, what for me is speaking about this, you know, right now is how do I rise up out of that fear?
Yes.
How do I let that not be the driving space for me, but still recognizing that I live in a world that has some of that in it, right? But still not have that be the complete construct that I show up in. And so staying really present focused for me is really, really important. I can't get too far ahead in the future. I was, you know, for so many years of my life, it's been, I have either lived in the past, which creates all sorts of sadness and depression. And I, you know, feeling like I'm, you know, worthless or whatever, because I've made whatever choices I've made. Or I get super future focused, which brings in overwhelm and anxiety and all of those sorts of things. And none of that allows me to show up as my authentic self. And none of that allows me to connect with my higher self and my intuitive self and all of those things. So really having to stay out of fear and doing that by staying really present focused. And I don't know, for me has been really important, especially now. You know, there's so much fear consciousness in the world right now. And so having to really focus in, sometimes it's on the next hour. How do I stay present and focused in the next hour? Because there's a lot coming up for a lot of people.
Yeah, and it's changing really fast. So, you know, if you're listening and you're like, yeah, I don't know what's everything's changing so rapidly, and including your emotions, you know, what you think of your job or what you want to do, like it's okay if it's changing that quickly, because I think that we actually are changing really quickly right now. And like you were saying, the fear is only going to stop that progression. It's only going to get in the way of it. It's not actually helping. So
yeah,
it's the illusion.
Exactly. And I feel like, I don't know about you, but for me, I feel like my purpose here is to learn how to break free of that illusion, right? To learn how to rise above that and show up in a way that's different for myself. So we were talking a little bit earlier about how I feel like this life was really about how do I finalize a whole lot of contracts and a whole lot of ways of being that I've been for a very long time, so that I can step into this new space of being present, of opening myself up to more light and love and self-awareness and connection to source that I've never had before and never had kind of an understanding of. And so just really, and so allowing myself to be present in that, and to allow old constructs to go away and be okay with that. You know, for a long time, I think I have held on to them because it's been what I've known, not only this lifetime, but other lifetimes, right? Because we are eternal beings. We are, you know, go on for more time than the present. But in this present moment, I need to stay focused on how does it feel? How does it resonate so that I can really start separating myself from or allowing those pieces of myself to clear and be okay with letting them go.
Mm-hmm.
That was
And I have a, what's that? Sorry.
I was just gonna say that was kind of a long explanation. Tangent. Hello.
It was all relevant, and I think it's just what's coming to mind right now is that I have a feeling that people that are either resonating with this or are drawn to us or people like us are, you know, they're going to be seeking therapy or coaching for completely different reasons than they have been in the past. That's just my gut feeling. They're going to be looking for people like us, which there are a lot of people like us out there that are trying to bridge the gap between, you know, people that are not just wanting diagnostic treatment planning type therapy, which does have a place, totally has a place. And we're also not completely in this other, like, I don't even know the word for that. Like, what would be the other word for that? Like, totally out there. You know, we're bridging the gap between traditional and non-traditional, so we're trying to stay balanced in what we're offering.
Yes.
You know, but also people that have been more traditional in their healing approach that are wanting a little bit more freedom in how they work with people like us to explore these multidimensional parts of themselves. You know,
Exactly.
people that are like, I'm seeing things, I'm channeling things, I'm having these other experiences that I don't feel like I can talk to my other friends about. You know?
Yes, exactly. And, you know, and I've had several people approach me recently who are saying, you know, it's weird because I have lived this other construct for a really long time. And all of a sudden, like I have these knowings that are happening and I have this intuition that is really strong that I know things are going to happen that I, you know, have shut off for a really long time. And I don't know how to address it, but I have all this anxiety and all of this overwhelm around it. And how do I manage that stuff? And having a safe space to be able to do that, I think is really important because, you know, it feels isolating to all of a sudden start saying, oh, I'm seeing things that not everybody else sees, right? And I am hearing things that not everybody else hears, and I am knowing things that not everybody else knows, and that can be really isolating. So having somebody that you can just kind of be present with and say, and that can have a conversation with you and say, oh yeah, I know what that feels like, and it's okay, and you're not crazy, you're not, you know, bipolar, you're not any of these things, you're not having a psychotic break. It's part of waking up to who you are as a human and what your purpose and what your experience is that you wrote for yourself in this lifetime. And let's be present with that and how you use that in a way that supports your highest good.
Yeah. And how different is that to seek coaching or therapy for that reason of like, I want to be able to know my truth. And the only way to do that, it kind of comes back to what we talked about, is it's easier to know our truth when you can be reflected by somebody that can really receive what you're saying.
Yes.
Versus going to a therapist or a coach or any other healer that doesn't necessarily understand this what we're talking about, and that can actually do more damage when somebody goes and shares these things and it's not really received or understood. It can start that self-doubt of like, am I crazy? Like, you know, it's that self-doubt that we want to start really letting go of.
Exactly. And because it's that, like, again, owning our own experience and owning our own present state and being okay with all of that, right? I think for so long, I spent not being okay with that. And it had really significant impact on my body, right? So trying to shut down who I am as a person so that I can be present in whatever state everybody else tells me I should be like, has had for me a really significant body impact. So, um, you know, gut issues, um, foggy brain, like a whole host of body things, because my body started shutting down because I was trying so hard to rigidly fit in with something that didn't fit for me, and I was trying to conform. And and so I think just having somebody that you can have those kinds of conversations with, and be, and have it be okay that you get to show up however you are in that moment, and you don't have to be anything. You don't have to be diagnosed with anything. Nothing has to be wrong. You know what I mean? I think for so long we have been taught that things are wrong, and they're not always wrong. They just are. Right. You know, and how do you navigate what is for you, instead of how do you solve what's wrong? Because we are divine beings, right? So there's nothing really wrong with us. It's society's construct of what doesn't fit the mold.
Right. What's normal and what's, yeah. Well, and also, like, not only do our bodies shut down when we deny our truth, but our psyche and intuition does start to shut down as well. And so that's, that starts to have us compartmentalize our truth. So if it wasn't, if there wasn't a safe space to be able to be ourselves and be in our truth, we start to compartmentalize it as a child. And a lot of us are still, working on that as adults. And so I think a lot of what's happening with the world right now and this whole virus thing, it's people are waking up to, I can't actually compartmentalize anymore. I can't even hold that space anymore. And so here it is. And then how do I just be with all that?
Yes. How do I navigate all of that? Yes.
Yeah.
And it's hard, right? Because I think for even those of us that are waking up to it, it still is, it's an unknown space. I think you and I have talked about this a couple of different times of, I'm taking the next right step, right? I can't create a formula, but I can surround myself with people who are doing the same kinds of things. So taking whatever feels like the next right step, stepping into the unknown, knowing it's safe ground, but not having a clear vision of what that is, and becoming aware of intuition and what, and what's going on for me in that moment. But I think for a long time, people want to plan, right? We want to be told what's the next thing to do, how's it going to all unfold, what's the perfect thing to do. And creating space for whatever is really, I think, important, and connecting to those people who are okay with that as well, and are saying, yep, I'm sitting here with you. I get the feeling of it's uncomfortable and comfortable all at the same time. And I'm okay with you being here with me in this moment, and you're good and you're safe and you're okay. And I think that's a lot of the work that I'm doing right now with people, and I think you're doing a lot of the same, Jess, is letting people know it's okay. Whatever shows up, it's okay. And how do you allow that to guide you?
Yeah, and to hold space for that they already know their truth, and to continue to reflect to them and encourage them to start trusting their truth. I mean, that's a lot of the therapeutic process now that I think we're doing. Is it doesn't have, there's no solution except to continue to help the person understand that they already know their answers, just to start to really trust them and discern, that discernment piece.
Yes. And it's fascinating. I've used this word a lot lately, fascinating, but it really is. I've kind of stepped out of this being in the middle of everything and really purposefully tried to take more of an observer role in my life and in what's going on. So the word that keeps showing up for me is fascinating, but when you can start showing up in those ways, all of these things that don't feel good, so anxiety, sadness, all of that stuff starts dissipating. It's not so present, right? I mean, I've had so many people show up to me in my office or on Zoom, right? Because I do a lot of my work on Zoom. Right. And full of overwhelm, full of everything feels icky and I don't know how to do it. And, there's all of this body stuff happening and, I've got headaches and I've got all of this other stuff. And just having safe space to sit in and to say, no, you know what you need to do. So let's talk about what that feels like for you and what that is for you and what's telling you that you can't do that anymore. Or what's telling, what past thoughts have shown up for you that keeps you from doing what you know you should be doing. And they come back and a lot of those things start to melt away, right? And it's not like all of a sudden I feel fabulous 100% of the time, but it's that focused drive of nothing feels right starts going away.
Yeah. Yep. And at least they know they can start to trust what does, even if it's only like a tiny bit of their life at first. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah. And I think the other piece is that there's still, right, when you're doing the next right thing, like when you're showing up authentically as yourself, when you are living in discernment, living in, present focus, all of these kinds of things, it doesn't mean that sadness doesn't show up. It doesn't mean that all of these other feelings that we've experienced don't show up. But what you do in those moments is be present with them, right? You be present with the feeling that shows up and you allow it to be there instead of denying it. And it passes through in a faster time frame, and you get to use your voice and say, this is how I'm feeling in this moment, and this is what I'm associating it with, and this is, and then you get to choose, right? So as long as you stay present focused, you get to choose, even in those negative feelings, or even in those, wouldn't call them negative, but those feelings that don't feel so great. You get to work through those instead of blocking them out, instead of pushing them to the side, instead of drinking our way through them, or, whatever other thing that we're doing so that we don't have to feel them. I think oftentimes people come in and they're like, oh, I'm going to do this work and everything's going to be better and I'm never going to feel bad again. And that's not the case either, right? But the goal is that that I get to show up authentically as myself, and I get to have my sovereign space, and I get to choose what those feelings are. I get to own them. I get control of all of that stuff, and I get to experience all of that stuff. And when you do that, anxiety goes away, overwhelm goes away. All of that other stuff goes away because you're living in present moment and you're experiencing everything that shows up for you.
I love that. And one of the words that was standing out was choice, like you have a choice. And again, going back to oppressive models, that's the number one thing. That's the biggest illusion, is that you don't have a choice. And I mentioned this to Denise earlier of Stockholm syndrome, right? Like the gate's wide open and you're staring at it thinking you can't leave. And that's what's happening right now, is that the gate is wide open energetically for all of us right now to be in joy and bliss and pleasure and play. And that we can't forget that we have that choice, even though everything right now is telling us we're supposed to be hunkering down and afraid. That we have a choice.
Yes.
And to exercise that choice and say, exercise. And it doesn't mean we have to break out and start being irresponsible. That's not it at all. Is that recognize you're already free and that you have a choice in the energy that you carry with you. You don't have to carry what everyone's telling you to carry. And you don't have to feel the guilt and the shame that might come from you being happy right now. Like, what if you were in, that's one thing that's interesting, is like, what if I'm actually really blissful and enjoy in the middle of a pandemic? What does that mean about me, right? Or all the judgment that might come if I really show up being okay right now. So yeah.
Yes, exactly. And it's okay, right? I think there's so much fear consciousness out there that for many of us, we are experiencing moments of joy, and we're afraid to share that with others because of the huge, fear consciousness that's out there. And so I urge you to feel it, right? If you're feeling joyful, feel joyful, like experience it. The sun has been shining in ways lately that I have never seen it in my life, right? I mean, it's amazing, and it's warm and it's beautiful. And I'm watching people connect in ways that they haven't connected before. I'm, hearing people who are grounding themselves into the earth and really getting centered in it. And we're not talking about it as much as we should, or as much as we want to, because we are, we're worried about what others might think. And so share that joy and share that bliss, and share that happiness, because there is happiness, right? I mean, I think of all of the experiences that I have had in my life that have had a lot of oppression and a lot of trauma, right? And I reflect back on those, and even in those moments, there were parts of it that were joyful, and there were parts of it that were happy. And it's okay to have those experiences, right? And so be happy, be blissful, share it, own it, love it.
And that's how you'll find your tribe, actually, is actually be bright, if you're feeling it, show it, and then you'll attract other people that you can be that authentic with. So
yes,
find each other right now. Let's just keep sharing.
Yes, we do. It's so, I think, and I feel like it's so important more now than ever. So many people were isolating, right? Because so many of us are under quarantine or whatever. And so share your light and find your people. Because that's the only way you're going to find them, is if you start showing up authentically as yourself, and you start saying, oh, this is what I like. I want to talk about this sort of stuff. And, if people don't want to talk about it, that's all right. But keep talking about it until somebody who does like it shows up.
Right. Right. And they will.
Yes, yes, they do. They do.
Right now it might be virtually, but that's okay.
It's all right, right? Because we still get to connect virtually and have those conversations, and that's good. I was talking to somebody the other day, and they were like, well, how do I find those people? How do I find my tribe? How do I find community? And this was the same conversation. It's like, start identifying what it is that is community for you. Start identifying what it is that you want in friendship, what it is that you want in connection. What are the things you want to talk about, right? Get it clear on those things. And then all of a sudden you start talking about them because you're like, oh, this is what I really like, and this is what I want to do. And then people start showing up, and, hashtag those words, or whatever you're going to do. If social media is the only way to connect right now, then hashtag those things that resonate for you, and post, and let people start showing up.
And ask online of who resonates with this, and just get really clear. I love that you said that, like maybe getting clear on what feels good to you and what brings pleasure is also another way to do it.
Yes.
What feels good in my body,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which I get goosebumps over when I start talking about,
Yeah.
I talk about for hours.
I
It might
know.
be funny, but other people are like, "Oh, yes."
Yeah. But it's good, like with Denise, I can talk to Denise for hours, like, and we could just keep going with this for hours, I feel like. But that's a good sign. It's like, who do you lose track of time with, or what activities do you lose yourself in? And those are what we need to be focusing on right now.
Yes, exactly. Find your people, because right now more than ever we need them.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. And they're probably different than who we have been connected to in the past, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm. Good point. Really good point. Being open to that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, beautiful. Anything else for today? I mean, we just kind of went for it. This felt good.
It did. I'm like, wow. It's funny how you start something and you're like, I wonder how this is going to go. And an hour later, it's like, oh, we had a really great conversation.
Yeah. And actually, to maybe on an end note, I could just bring this up, that Denise and we sat down to like decide what we were going to talk about, and it was impossible for us to plan a beginning, middle, and end of anything. Like, we were just, I think that's where a lot of us are at right now, is we just have to say yes to showing up and letting whatever happen. And so if whoever's watching is feeling inspired to reach out in this way, to not have to worry about planning it out to get online and start sharing your story. And in fact, just get on and let it happen, because that's what we're being asked to do, is show up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not plan it out.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And if you need somebody to help bring that out for you, get a hold of us, right? I mean, we're both here, and we want to share. So
definitely
reach out, because we're here.
Yep. We'll do more of these too.
Exactly, because they're fun.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Denise.
Hey, thanks, Jess. This has been fun. See you all later.
Okay.